All right, hello everyone, and welcome to David Cronenberg, the father of modern body horror. Although, as he would say, he's just like, I never called it body horror. I never really, um, oops, what are you doing down here? One sec. I'm just trying to move this one second. There we go. Okay. All right. So, if you whether you're familiar with David Cronenberg or not, you've probably heard some of his films referenced. Films like Videodrome, Scanners, his remake of The Fly. You might have heard Dead Ringers because that was remade as a TV series a year or two ago. Or more recently, his films like Crimes of the Future, A History of Violence. The man has had a very long and storied and actually more varied career than you would think, considering what films of his usually come up. But the man is, for the most part, first and foremost known for really revolutionizing the idea of body horror on screen. And we will get to that soon enough. But first, we're going to give you a little introduction. So, if there is both a trailer and a film that I think really encapsulates a lot of what Cronenberg does really well, it is Videodrome and specifically that trailer. That blend of both biology, technology, and sexuality, things that come up in his films a lot, in one very gross but very intriguing and again, as it said, provocative package. And this is what he became really known for, which is interesting because if you ever read his work, he never really set out to be a provocateur or smash any taboos. He is someone when he talked about movies, is just what he found to be fairly interesting. However, Cronenberg himself is actually kind of just a cool old regular dude. This is from his visit to the Criterion Closet. If you're not familiar with what the Criterion Closet is, Criterion Collection releases a lot of art house movies, important films, indie movies, and they have this whole thing where they will invite filmmakers, actors, musicians, anyone who's a film buff in to pick stuff from their closet. Todd and I have contemplated just writing to Criterion and saying, please let us come into the closet. We will make a great video, we promise.
Mm.
We'll be so entertaining. Although, Todd, didn't you say we'd be like when, who was it that went into the closet and just took like handfuls of like stacks of stuff?
Was that Fines and Cotillard or
Yes, no, it wasn't Cotillard. It was, Ray Fiennes and Juliette
that was
Binoche.
it?
They were just like, oh, there's that and there's that. So it's like, please let us into the closet. We will have a great time. And he's not just a filmmaker. He has acted in a couple of movies. So if you're familiar with the Pamela Smart case, you might have seen the Nicole Kidman film To Die For. He is in that movie towards the end of it. So go back and watch it and look for him. He's also in a Canadian film called Last Night. He's Jason X. I mean, his acting filmography is almost as varied as his directorial filmography. And his films are pretty highly regarded in the film world. He's competed at Cannes a lot of times. And in Canada, he has won numerous Canadian Screen Awards, or what they used to be called Genies. They're now just called Canadian Screen Awards now. He's written a book called Consume, which, Todd, I believe you have read that book. Am
As a
I
matter of fact, yes. Actually, funny enough,
okay?
that was one I had stumbled across an advanced copy by accident, so by sheer chance, I got the opportunity to read it before it hit shelves.
Oh yeah. And just his personal life, was married to his wife for almost 40 years. Her death actually was the inspiration for one of his more recent films, or I should really say more of his grieving process. And two of his children are in the arts. His daughter's a photographer, and Brandon is making films as well. He made Possessor and Infinity Pool. And I was asking, someone asked, like, is he just like his dad? And I'm like, well, here's the thing. You watch Brandon's movies, you can see that he's his father's son, but he's also doing his own thing and taking it in his own direction. Infinity Pool is a great, I mean, Possessor's great too, but man, I loved Infinity Pool. That was in my top 10 of the year it came out. I'm like, I know a lot of people hated this. I loved it. Um, but he is someone where when he was asked about his filmography, and this is from an interview from Flashback Files. And the question is, a lot of people, when they write about your work, seem to make a distinction between the horror movies you did earlier in your career and the movies you do today. And this was before he started kind of going back into horror. He goes, is that something you're comfortable with? And he answers, it's been a very natural evolution for me, so I don't feel there's a separation. Even when I made genre pictures, I also did Den Ringers, which was based on a true story. So I don't see it as a segmented career. I understand that my earlier films were more obviously genre pictures, but you can draw a line from a film like Spider to those directly to those earlier films. For fans who love strange creatures and monsters and things, I haven't been doing that lately. That's true. But if you're a critic writing about the thematic connections amongst the films, I think you can see a perfect connection amongst them. It depends on what your approach to film is as a critic or a fan. For me, creatively, it feels exactly the same. And as someone who has followed his career, I definitely see the lines between when he was doing something, let's say, A History of Violence versus something like The Brood. Uh, Emotion has always been a core part of his work. People's connection to each other has been a core part of his work. And he's also a fairly political filmmaker as well, not political in the traditional sense, but in that he tries to really look at some of the forces that can kind of turn and affect society. But I did kind of split his filmography up into three different categories just because I figured it would make it a little easier and a little more interesting than just going chronologically to his through his career. So we're going to start out with like his early life and some of his first films before we get into his more, I would say, proper filmography. So as you may have seen, the fact that he's won a lot of Canadian Screen Awards, Cronenberg's Canadian, and he has actually stayed in Toronto. I don't think he's ever really permanently moved to LA. He stays up in Canada. As someone who loves the cold, I can't blame him. I feel like I probably could live in the Great White North myself. Born in Toronto, which is a pretty, metro, like, it's a city. He didn't live in like, it wasn't like the suburbs or anything. And both of his parents were in the arts as well. His mother was a musician, his dad was a writer, and his dad also read a lot of short stories, some old pulp stuff, including science fiction, which he started to read when he was younger. And he did read a lot of comic books, although he wasn't much into the superhero type of comic books. Again, he liked the more adventure comics, pulp comics, science fiction comics. Although when someone did ask him about how he feels about the whole superhero movie trend, as they were asking everybody about, 5 to 10 years ago, he just put it as like it's not for me, but it is its own genre and it's fine. Um, and as he was younger, he became obsessed with insects, which, oh boy, Todd, could you believe that David Cronenberg was really into insects as a child?
I'm shocked. Shocked, I tell you.
And he was real, and he developed an interest in science, which he said his parents were really happy about because they meant, oh, good, he's probably going to get a really good, well-paying job right out of college. Um, that didn't exactly go the way they thought because he majored in cell biology and then switched to English, which they were still like, okay, that's still good. Didn't see him becoming a filmmaker. So I was reading his book Cronenberg by Cronenberg, and this is when he kind of goes through all of his films. But he was talking about his early life, and he's like, I did watch movies as a child. Like I watched old monster movies, I watched silent films, but for him, film was not really an art form. Film was something he saw merely as entertainment. He didn't have the like the Martin Scorsese, like having a religious experience seeing a movie on screen as a child. But when he was taking film classes in college, a student showed him a film, David Sector's, called Winter Kept Us Warm, and he is like, that movie changed my life and changed how I saw film. That was the movie that made him see that film is not just something to watch and entertain you. Film's something to make you feel something, to convey emotion, to put you in the seat of the character. So it is this little known film that ended up really changing his life and in some ways kind of changing cinema. And so he did have two early short movies that he made. They're both under an hour long, called Stereo and Crimes of the Future. So there is going to be, he does have a full-length feature film called Crimes of the Future. They are very, very different from each other. I would not really recommend going to look at the short Crimes of the Future. It is, I think the best way to describe it is it's something that someone in their 20s would make to seem very, um, you know, bold and trying to raise hard questions. But it's a, sometimes it's good to leave that stuff behind. So his first major features are two movies called Shivers and Rabid. So they come out in the mid to late 70s. The reason he made these movies was because in the 70s, Canada had grants for movies, for that were lower budget in that they could play on like the smaller stations, and if they could make some money, that was good. And he's like, well, what's really, you know, almost an always guaranteed moneymaker is the horror genre, and that remains true today. I mean, you can have a movie that costs next to nothing to make, people will go see it. A really good example this past weekend was there was a film that was made independently by a guy and his family over the course of 3 years about a dog in a haunted house. The trailer came out, it was originally supposed to be straight to streaming. People were really hyped by the trailer. They released it in the theaters. That movie's already made almost $3 million, probably way more than it ever cost to make. So horror is always a profitable genre, or I should say, for the most part, horror bombs can happen sometimes, just like that. What was it, Todd? That Exorcist reboot?
Oh yeah,
Yeah, you don't
that
always
might be
print
the most
money.
that might be the most infamous box office failure that failure in horror for a long time yet.
Yeah. But Shivers and Rabid, not so. But we see in these early movies the thing that Cronenberg becomes well known for. Not just body horror, but why it works so well for people, and why it tends to get under your skin. So Shivers is about a parasite, kind of going back to his interest in insects and biology, and it leads to sexual aggression. It can be sexually transmitted. When you watch this movie and you see like the transmission, it is very pointedly appears to be like sexual assault, or in other cases, it's more like an orgy. But it's one where that is something that could upset a lot of people because the idea of something being sexually transmitted, that happens in real life. So what if it's not just something you need to go to get like a shot for? It's what if it's something that makes you crazy and makes you lose your mind and makes you assault people? That is a terrifying idea. So just that idea is something that is it hits home to a lot of people. And then there's Rabid, which is the more well-known of his two early films, partially because it stars Marilyn Chambers, who was an erotic actress at the time looking to break into more mainstream film. She gets into an accident, she gets a skin graft, in an experimental treatment, and then she has a blood-sucking stinger afterwards, which drains people of blood. And shocking no one, that stinger looks very phallic. And again, these are things that like almost the lizard monkey part of our brains, where if we see them, it's like that's wrong, that's not supposed to be there. And that's why a lot of body horror works, is because in the very primitive recesses of our brains where we're taught to recognize things that look okay and things that don't, that scares us. It's like a your body's not supposed to look like that. Why is it doing that? And I'll say this, of the two movies, I would actually say Shivers is a little better. Um, Although there is a good remake of Rabid that came out like 6 years ago. I would recommend checking that one out. But if you had to watch any of the two of these, I would say go with Shivers. Todd, I don't know if you agree.
It's one where I part of me wants to get not to go a little more or to bat for Rabid because there's a good start and there is a genuinely haunting final few shots, but it meanders so much in the middle.
Yeah, but it's I don't know, there's some moments in Shivers that like genuinely creep me out because again, it's a even for a first film, he you could tell he knew that like basically how to convey the disturbing nature of the transmission of this parasite. But it wasn't all phallic stingers and sexually transmitted parasites for his first films. He made a racing movie. Just nothing gross, nothing weird, just a typical racing movie. It's just about a guy who he wants to race, but he's got a rivalry going on with somebody. It's a fairly standard film to the point where if you, this is the one where if you look at Cronenberg's filmography, you're like, how'd that get in there? But turns out he likes cars, and he has said he's just like, it's not a personal film to me, but hey, I like cars, I like racing. It's a lot of fun. Although he's gonna return to race cars and crashes and racing in the 1990s with a little movie called Crash.
Gotta say, I think for me the bigger shock of this isn't David Cronenberg made a racing movie. It's David Cronenberg made a movie with John Saxon.
John Saxon was in everything, though. That doesn't surprise me. He's like a patron saint of B films. You know, we love and respect John Saxon's hustle.
He has a very particular flavor that doesn't always overlap with a guy like Cronenberg.
It doesn't, but honestly, for some of like Cronenberg's early 80s Canadian movies, I'm like, no, John Saxon would fit right into a number of these. So, now that we're getting into Cronenberg really coming into his own, what are common themes of his movies? So, as he said, if you're familiar with his films, you can look at his movies and kind of see a really connective tissue between all of them, whether it's body horror or a more traditional quote unquote dramatic film. So, The Body, obviously, and even then something like Eastern Promises with Viggo Mortensen, The Body features heavily into that, just not in the way in, let's see, a film like Scanners. Technology is also something that really goes into it. And there's a number of films that talk about technology as it affects our brains, as it affects our body, or even just the environment as it affects our body. And there's one, Crimes of the Future, there's this idea of indirectly, technology is changing our bodies via how it directly affects the environment. Um, just human interaction and connection. That is, I think, the real through line with a lot of his films is a lot of his movies feature a lot of very broken people who are searching for some kind of connection with another person. You have Viggo Mortensen's character in A History of Violence. You learn desperately trying to seek a normal life. You have something like with The Brood, which is actually a story of a divorce and a family breaking up. Or at the core of his remake of The Fly, it's a doomed romance. Or Dead Ringers, a really weird codependent relationship. So, you also have he likes he like charismatic leader types factor into his movies or almost kind of cult-like thinking. In Maps to the Stars, there are characters who are obsessed with this actress. One is her daughter, but others are just people who saw her in a movie and they love quoting this one line of hers as if it's a prayer. Obviously, if you watch The Dead Zone, the way he films Martin Sheen's character, who is definitely a demagogue type, or Todd, you want to talk a little bit about Elias Koteas and Crash, or do we want to save that for the Crash slide?
I mean, you could say that for the Crash slide, but since you brought up the Brood already before this,
Mhm.
Oliver Reed's character in that with his kind of weird wellness cult's another prime example.
Yeah, like it's that's something that kind of, and even I would say the twins and Dead Ringers, back to that, there is this kind of it's a symbiotic relationship they have with each other, but the way that they're filmed and the way that they interact with others, there is an almost otherworldly quality to them. So people are they're both repelled and intrigued and taken in by them. And then, of course, the final one, which I had to use this community image for, is sex. I'm going to keep this as work safe as I can, but sex is something that factors into his movies a lot. Cronenberg is a man that makes movies for adults. That is a part of adult life. I would not recommend showing like a 6-year-old any of these movies. But there is sex as it relates to body horror. There is sex as it relates to technology, sex as it relates to interaction, even the charismatic cult leader stuff. And I believe a lot of people who who has seen a Cronenberg movie or a couple of them has a story of watching them and having a feeling of, should I be feeling this while watching it? For me, it was watching The Fly and going, oh, Jeff Goldblum's so handsome. Oh, Jeff Goldblum's still handsome even after he got fused a little bit with The Fly. And then it quickly became, oh no, Jeff Goldblum's not handsome anymore. Or I think Todd, for you, what was it? Debbie Harry and
Videodrome.
Videodrome?
Yep.
When you met Debbie Harry, did you tell her that you had a crush on her from Videodrome?
I felt a little awkward saying that at that point.
But yeah, no, so I had to choose that image. But there is this one of a quote. It was from an interview with fellow filmmaker Jim Jarmusch, where he said, "I'm actually talking about the beauty, the incredible beauty of the body, even inside the body," which I think we're going to get into a little more, especially we talk about something like Crimes of the Future. I don't know if I'd agree with about the beauty of the inside of the body. I've always found that to be a little gross, but you can kind of see it in some of his films. So, we're actually going to get started with his adaptations first because if there's something Cronenberg does like to do, and a lot of directors like to do, they get inspired by other people's art, by other people's stories. And they want to put their own spin on it. Going back to Martin Scorsese, Scorsese would often get inspired by like books he read and been like, I want to make this into a film. Um, so his first adaptation is The Dead Zone, adapted from the novel by Stephen King. We actually discussed that movie a bit in our Stephen King program. He then adapted Naked Lunch in 1991, M. Butterfly in 1993, Crash 1996 by J.G. Ballard, Spider in 2002, A History of Violence, A Dangerous Method in 2011, and finally Cosmopolis in 2012, which, if you're familiar with Ellie, who's been on this program before, I think she is still lists that as one of the 10 best movies of the 2010s. Also, that was like the first movie where people looked at Robert Pattinson outside of Twilight and said, oh, hey, he's not just Edward Cullen.
Yeah.
But we're not going to go over every adaptation. I picked three that I thought would probably be the most interesting ones to talk about. And since we'd already talked about the Dead Zone, I figured we're going to talk about Naked Lunch, which is a weird, really weird movie. And I'm going to say this full disclosure, I am not a big Burroughs fan. I've tried. I just don't think the way he writes is for me. But Todd, I know you were a big fan of this movie, so I'll let you have the floor.
So I'll be the first to admit I have not actually gotten the chance to read Burroughs. I really should because this movie is, yes, this is a genuinely strange film, but I was intrigued just by a lot of what I was seeing. This is so for everything I've heard about the way he writes, there is no way you're ever going to get a textually faithful adaptation of William Burroughs. It's one part his style and one part just his subject matter. You can't do it. There's actually the quote here where Cronenberg was he went on record as saying there's no way he could faithfully completely lift this book because number one, it would be insanely expensive, and number two, there is no way he could get away with a lot of what's in that on screen. The interesting thing he does do is he takes elements of the book and he actually mixes them with some elements of William Burroughs' actual life, which leads to one of the more curious things I have found about Burroughs on film is there have been multiple directors who have adapted his work, and alongside trying to adapt particular books of it, they all wind up making. They have made multiple. You got multiple directors that made allusions to a rather infamous piece of William Burroughs lore involving his wife, a shot glass, a firearm, and the question of whether or not William Burroughs committed murder. Let those pieces all kind of gel for a moment.
Hmm.
In
I
this
mean, if
case, Cronenberg has scenes that allude to that not once but twice in the movie.
yeah, I was about to say, I think even if you've never read a book by Burroughs, you might have heard that piece of lore about Burroughs.
And yeah, it's one. This is I really thought about how do you try and elevator pitch this movie, and I really don't know how you go about it. It is just kind of one of those like, see if anybody has a consortium if you're curious. You'll know within the first 15 or 20 minutes if this movie's for you.
Mhm. Also, fun fact, but via one of our the groups we run in, there is a couple from Tokyo where the guy has one of the props from this film. I think it's the giant like insect at the
Yeah,
typewriter.
that's one of those other things. Look at this. In a career like Cronenberg's, this has some really solid, striking visuals from him. There is the
Mhm.
creature we see here. There is like the what you were just referring to, like the cockroach typewriter thing, and even just the way some of it is shot is really striking.
I'd also say this might be Peter Weller's best work. Everyone mainly knows him from RoboCop, but I think he's great here.
Oh no, he's on his game here. Also, great performance by the late Julian Sands. May he rest in peace.
Yeah, R.I.P. And the always great Judy Davis. And now moving on to wait, I did want to bring this up. So when I initially saw this episode, I did not know who David Cronenberg was, and I'm like, that's a weird title for a movie. But this is a great joke, just Nelson. I can think of two things wrong with that title. Which, when you see the film, you'll be like, yeah, I don't know where that title does not really fit anything that happens here, but that's kind of par for the course with Burroughs, really. So moving on, the other Cronenberg car film. I told you we'd get back to Cronenberg and cars, and this might be his most controversial film. I think the only one that could really go up against it might be Crimes of the Future because of the opening scene. But this film, I was like 10 or 11 when it came to like the official US release. And I remember hearing and reading about how polarizing this film was. And definitely one where it was like, I think even kid me who wanted to seek out movies was like, I don't think I can watch that movie. This movie seems odd. But uh, once I was an adult, it's a really good film. It's again taboo breaking, but there was something Roger Ebert alluded to this in his review where he goes, it puts you in a trance. And I think that's actually a very good way to describe this movie. It's almost hypnotic. You are, again, this idea of you are both repelled and intrigued by something. You want to keep watching. And there is, again, this isn't like a strict body horror film, but there is this idea of people who could get into car accidents and have these scars, these mutilations, and what people might find repellent, other people find incredibly intriguing. Is a good way to describe this film. Also, great performance by James Spader. Like everyone in it's great, but both Spader and Holly Hunter are um, the two most famous people to be in this film at the time. Their careers suffered greatly for being in it. Even like Holly Hunter coming off of Best Actress win, the conversation at the time is what is she thinking doing this movie? This has set her career back. And Spader has been fairly open that this movie did hurt his career after a while, and it wasn't until people started to really reevaluate it that he kind of had a boost again. Also, I would like to point out there are two movies called Crash. The good one is the one from the 90s. The bad one is the one that inexplicably won an Oscar. I cannot believe that happened. Because I've seen that movie, and how did it get nominated? Anyway, the other thing I just wanted to put in here is if anyone knows of the film Julia Ducournau's Titane, I believe I said Crash walked so Titane could run. And if you've seen either of these movies, you will understand what I mean. But yeah, critics overall were like, they're like, even if it's not for me, I definitely see that it's a well-made film. But audiences were not having it, and the fact that it was also an NC-17 film at the time of its release did not help as well. But Todd, would you like to talk about the character of Elias Koteas here as kind of a cult leader type?
So, going off what we described for what little we can go into the plot on this one, James Spader and Holly Hunter play two people who they wind up in a car accident, and they have this moment of realizing afterwards, like, I don't know how to explain this. They're basically excited by it for the most work safe way
Hmm.
to put it. They wind up ultimately kind of running into the circle of there are basically people who have this similar sort of, let's call it, excitement over car crashes, who are led by Elias Koteas, who is, you may not recognize him immediately by name. He is a character actor who definitely makes the rounds. You may have seen him in things like Shutter Island. God, I'm trying to some other good ones. God, I feel like there's a recent one I am going to be kicking myself for forgetting he was in.
Yeah, we'll remember it tonight.
But it's what he is. Again, he does run this theater with this almost cult like fervor. He has this genuinely, it's this very gruff, very weird charisma where you just look at him still at me, you wouldn't necessarily think, okay, I can see this guy leading this group. You watch the way he plays, and I'm like, no, I get it. I get why this is the guy everyone's on rallies around.
Yeah. Yeah, but at the core, his character is someone who rallies them into doing incredibly destructive and dangerous things. But I mean, that's what cults in many
Yeah.
cases
And
really
I mean,
are. It's
that's
a
kind of what marks the turning point of the film is that I won't say too much just beyond there is a moment where it kind of drives home. Yeah, you don't always walk away from these crashes.
yes. So moving on to the third adaptation, a film that I really loved, especially when I saw it. It was like I was in college when it came out, and it was still like I hadn't seen a movie this. It was the first time I'd seen a more dramatic Cronenberg film, but it was also this kind of level of there was a rawness to it that I hadn't seen a lot of at the time. But also I like to bring this movie up because I hear this a lot in the library world or with book readers. People go, "Oh, the book is always better." A History of Violence is a good case of that is not always true. The graphic novel is fine. It's good. This movie is an absolute upgrade from the story. It takes everything about that story and it makes it deeper, it makes it more meaningful, it makes it scarier, and it makes it more tragic. So, Viggo Mortensen plays a man who works at a diner. One night, two robbers break in, and he's able to subdue them. He saves the day. He becomes a town hero. Fortunately, other people start to come to town who recognize him calling him by a different name, and it becomes very clear he has a past that he has not told anyone, including his wife, about. And it's not just is he running away from this past, it's a who is this man really? And this idea of who are you if you can flip to violence so quickly? And like even his children don't quite know his past, but even his son, who's older, is kind of like a little taken aback by my father killed someone. And this is just knowing my father killed someone in self-defense, but it's just you still killed someone. Who are you if you can very easily do that? And so that's something, a question this movie asks. And then this other idea of can you ever truly escape a violent past? And this is a question, this movie's 20 years old at this point. People have still debated. Is his character someone who truly changed and truly wanted to leave that past behind? Or is his whole quiet life with a wife and kids working at a diner, is that just a cover for him and he's just kidding himself that that violence is gone? So it's a really interesting film that has a lot of questions like that. Great performances by there's Ed Harris, there's William Hurt. I mean, Viggo Mortensen, obviously. Maria Bello's fantastic, and the horror in this film are is, I mean, again, the horror of I don't know who my husband is, but also for him, the idea of maybe I'm not the man I thought I was, maybe this monster is still inside of me. But the violence in this film as well is very visceral and very brutal. So it's not this glorified violence that you see in a lot of films. It's more of this idea of, even in the circumstance of you're trying to protect yourself, it is still violent and gory. I really don't want to give too much of this movie away. It is a great movie. I want you guys to see it if you haven't. Also, if you are a physical media person, Criterion is releasing a 4K edition in October, meaning when we get that, you guys, Jerry is getting our old DVD copy, so you can watch that then. So, we're moving on to the interpersonal relationships, although again, as you've kind of seen described, interpersonal relationships are a pretty consistent part of all of his films. So we have Dead Ringers, Eastern Promises, Maps to the Stars and the Shrouds. I know for a while Maps to the Stars was kind of seen as like, oh, this isn't as good of a Cronenberg film. I kind of liked Maps to the Stars. There's almost a campiness to it that I like, but there's a darkness to it. I mean, similar to History of Violence, this idea of there's secrets in this family. There's some harm in this family that people are trying to keep quiet. It's also very darkly comedic. So one of the storylines is Julianne Moore playing an actress who wants to get a certain role. And then, but unfortunately, another actress is the front runner for it, so she's very upset about it. And then she learns that the actress who is in the running for the role, her child got very seriously hurt. And so there is a scene where she hears that she goes, "Oh, that's awful. I hope she's okay." She hangs up the phone and then she starts doing a dance like she's happy. And it's again, very good dark comedic moment of highlighting the type of person she is. And then most recently is The Shrouds, which is his newest film. Very obviously heavily influenced by him grieving the death of his wife. I'm going to say I was not a fan of The Shrouds, and it actually really hurt me to not be a fan of this movie because, I mean, I'm like, ooh, Cronenberg, yay! And I came out of it going, there are a lot of interesting ideas in there, particularly the way this man is grieving his wife. You could read it as, and other people have brought this up. Sometimes when people die, the surviving partner almost feels a sense of betrayal, even though it's completely illogical. But it's like, you left me, how could you? This idea that he kind of wants to possess his wife even in death, just or even this idea that there are these shrouds that they put people in so you can have video footage of your family member's decomposing corpse that you can watch at any time. Very interesting ideas. I was not a fan of the end product, which again I will just say is a shame. Maybe I'll go back and rewatch it and it'll grow on me a little more, but not one of my favorite films. But one of film I do love, Dead Ringers. Dead Ringers is great. It is Jeremy Irons. I would argue this might be the best performance of Jeremy Irons' career. And this is a guy who's had a lot of really good performances, but he is so good in this, playing dual two twin brothers. One is a little more hedonistic, one's a little more buttoned up, but they have this really codependent relationship with each other. And also, twin gynecologists who become involved with the same person. If I were was it Genevieve Bujold? If I were her,
Yeah.
I'd run. I'm like, no, nope, nope.
I mean, when she's it's like when they're talking about just how close they are, one of the two brothers has a line pretty early on. It's probably one of the creepiest things we hear in the entire movie, which is saying something where he just goes, it's like until we both have this person, neither of us can say they've really been with them.
Yeah, no, run, sweetie, run out the door. So the basis for this film is interesting. There were real life twin OBGYNs called Stuart and Cyril Marcus, and they both died together, and it's never been quite figured out how they died. So there's a mystery there. So obviously this is very loosely taken from that. This is more of a very interesting idea, speculative thing. I wouldn't even say it's speculative because it's not really trying to be a biography, but it's more he's using this. very strange real life situation to explore again this idea of codependency to the point of I mean, when we think of toxic relationships, we usually think of toxic romantic relationships. Here, it's a toxic familiar relationship, although the way that they interact, there's definitely an intimacy there, not a romantic intimacy, but it's again, this movie's weird. It's weird and I love it. Um, so really well regarded by critics. Again, big hit at the Genies that year, and a few years later, when Jeremy Irons finally won an Oscar, he thanked David Cronenberg. I think even he's gone on record as saying that this is one of his favorite roles, and definitely one of the more challenging ones. And it's also a very I think it might be Cronenberg's most visually striking film. Like it's if you were a fan of the Brian Fuller show Hannibal, you might have seen the red robes and hoods referenced there. And then there's Eastern Promises, his one of his other collaborations with Viggo Mortensen. This is a crime drama film, but the um again, we go back to like the body. And this is one where I can kind of see what he means when he talks about the beauty of the body. So there is a fairly famous scene of Viggo Mortensen getting in a fight in a sauna. Um, and it's one where I'm watching, like, I think everyone who watches that is very concerned because it's like, oh boy, this could go wrong very fast. But it's almost similar in the way where if you ever watched old kung fu films or martial arts films, or even something like the Stallone Rocky movies, where they focused on the body as a machine, as a tool. That scene does that as well. Great movie. Great Naomi Watts performance as well. Every time I watch Naomi Watts in a movie, I'm like, man, I feel like Hollywood just did not know what to do with her. But she's great in this, and it's one where I kind of wish she would collaborate more with Vigo because they actually have a lot of good on-screen rapport as well. So now, what you all came here for because it's October, body horror. And so, what's funny, I'm calling David Cronenberg the father of modern body horror. When we've talked about body horror, we've said David Cronenberg is one of the faces on Mount Rushmore. But if you were to ask David Cronenberg himself, he would really not consider himself a pioneer of body horror. So, as he said, the thing that does bother me a little bit is body horror because I never used that term. It was a young journalist who invented that term and it stuck. It's out of my hands, but I would have never thought what I did was body horror. But I don't know how, I mean, again, he has a fascination with the body and biology, but if you were to watch some of his films, I don't know what you would call like Jeff Goldblum's Degeneration in The Fly or the anger babies in The Brood. Uh, actually, Todd, would you like to go into The Brood a little bit? The Brood and Scanners, because those two have some interesting things that you wanted to bring up.
So there's been a lot of speculation about the Brood, considering this is a movie that was born out of a divorce David Cronenberg was going through, and a custody battle, which is it's reflected in a couple of really interesting and kind of uncomfortable ways in the film itself. Besides that, the body horror also kind of represents this. There is a sort of theme of like intergenerational abuse and trauma, with the idea of these rage babies are basically something that's it's an internalized anger that's made external, and the film ends with kind of a bleak implication that this is being passed on to the next generation
Yeah.
because the way a film ends, like it doesn't get this nice, clean catharsis and resolution.
Yeah.
It's violence ending violently.
Yeah, years before Ari Aster kind of like explored this in Hereditary, David Cronenberg was doing it in The Brood.
Scanners is probably the one that's so in terms of Cronenberg's or his body horror. This is the movie where it's like if you know any single thing, it is probably one of the most infamous shots from this movie. Okay, so to give us a little bit of a context, the film itself involves these psychic beings called scanners, which was basically something Cronenberg conceived of as this was born out of the infamous thalidomide scare. Like, heard that story and kind of thought, what if instead of drugs causing like children to be born with like malformed limbs, it started giving them psychic powers? And this thing he establishes early on in the film, there is a sequence where the company that's supposedly overseeing these scanners, they're going to do a demonstration. They have somebody come from the crowd who is actually, they don't realize it's another scanner played by Michael Ironside. Michael Ironside goes up there, and his entire thing is basically use your abilities to try and read my mind. He proceeds to start mentally pushing back on this guy, and the scene culminates in the man's head exploding. This effect was a this was a triumph of weird DIY because as they tell the story, the way they did this was they took the actor, they made like a rubber likeness in the man's head, filled it with like a sort of like meat, dog food parts, what have you,
Mhm.
and then they had a stagehand behind this mannequin literally blow this thing's head off with a shotgun at point blank range, stuffed with rock salt. And part of the story for this was originally Cronenberg wanted this to be a two shot where Michael Ironside is standing right next to this guy as his head explodes. Michael Ironside looked at the way this is being done, and like most people would, have the idea of we want to film a shot where we fire a shotgun right next to you, he had reservations.
The
And
tinnitus alone.
I mean, initially at one point they're like, "Don't worry, Michael, it's totally safe." He kind of went like, "Okay, if it's totally safe, you stand here." So they instead of him the single shot, and probably one of the most infamous shots of Cronenberg's career was achieved as a result.
Yeah, it's I mean, you can Google the scanner's head explosion. That was one where I'm like, I can get away with a community joke about sex in a Cronenberg movie. I don't think I can get away with that. But it's that kind of really that's the movie that truly put him on the map was the head explosion in Scanners. And the rest of the movie is good as well, but um that is what kind of really, even more so than The Brood, made people go like, "Oh, this guy's doing some really crazy stuff." Also, I believe the method of stuffing a fake head full of craft service supplies. I think Tom Savini was the one who did that first. He was talking about doing that in Dawn of the Dead and stuff, where he's like, "Oh, that's what we got to do." I mean,
Yeah,
these movies made on the cheap. You got to use what you can.
they had a similar sort of use of that kind of affected Videodrome, which didn't go quite as successfully because those parts had been inadvertently cooking inside that prop TV for a while. So when it burst open, everyone smelled
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Well, speaking of Videodrome, what a great segue. This might be I don't know if it's Cronenberg's best film. It's up there. I think something like I think History of Violence is up there. I think Crash is up there. I think Dead Ringers is up there. But if we talk about the film that truly endures and the film that is very prophetic in a way that Cronenberg himself never intended, it's Videodrome. Um, and this is, it's very of its, what's funny is it's so of its time, the idea of UHF stations showing kind of low budget, dirty movies just to make some money, but all then uncovering the idea of a snuff channel. This was in 1983. This was well before the internet existed, and we now have this idea of the internet, a place where you can get some of the most really horrific real life awful violent stuff at your fingertips and what it could do to potentially change your brain. So this film is about James Wood. He plays a really greasy CEO. Um, I don't know if that was meant to be greasy or if that's just James Woods. I mean, he plays it well, but that guy's he always seems like he's got a little bit of a sleaziness to him. But he runs a UHS station. They show mainly cheap movies, dirty movies, and then he uncovers this snuff channel called Videodrome. And it turns out this is something that's being deliberately broadcast to try to change people's brains and their biology. And we're having this conversation now about how addictive smartphones are. And before that, it was this idea of what are people seeing on the internet? Are they being too desensitized? It even there's something that you can draw these parallels to social media. There's a character talking about in the future, everyone is going to have this electronic avatar that's going to represent them. My goodness, does that not sound like social media profiles? It is a film that was even Cronenberg has pretty much said he did not predict this. So recently he did an interview with fellow filmmaker Jim Jarmusch. And so Jarmusch says, I know you're a writer. I know you're interested in certain writers that are very important for me, like Burroughs, Philip K. Dick, Nabokov, and of course J.G. Ballard. And he says, he's like, goes forward and he goes, J.G. Ballard is now considered to be almost prophetic, as is Burroughs, and as are you in a way. And Cronenberg answers, I don't think of art as prophecy, and I don't think my purpose in making art, the art that I do, is to be a prophet. But if you're an artist, you perhaps have an antenna that are more sensitive again with the insect stuff than other people's, or at least you're paying more attention. There are signals in the zeitgeist that are suggesting what is happening beyond people's normal comprehension. And so if you're sensitive to that and you allow that to take control of some of what you're doing, you're going to anticipate things that will happen. People especially talk about Videodrome that way as anticipating the internet and so on. And when you see the movie, it's kind of undeniable. And I think that's the best way to describe it. This was not intended to be a prophetic piece, but it absolutely is. I mean, look at Derry Harry's line. We crave stimulation for its own sake. Does that not sound like checking your smartphone every 5 minutes? Or just I mean, now they're talking about people, some of the articles that go on Twitter and Facebook, it's mainly their AI generated rage bait content because people get dopamine hits from being angry at it. You watch this film and it is very, I don't want to say it predicted the future, but it's one where it was almost a man, Cronenberg had no idea what was actually coming, but he somehow got it right. And also the effects in this movie are really great. There is a point where James Woods pulls a VHS tape out of his chest. Obviously, you can see here the gun starts to meld himself to his arm. You saw earlier the TV comes alive. Todd referenced there's a moment where a TV or well, they didn't do that. They wanted to have a TV explode, but it was full of rotten meat, and that was awful. But it's a film that really justifies its continued relevance. And hey, you can check it out right here at the Derry Public Library. So now we're going to go to arguably, I'd say maybe Cronenberg's most well-known film, which is his remake of The Fly. And again, sometimes, I mean, look, I'll be the first to say there are too many remakes. Stop remaking movies. However, every now and then there's a remake that justifies its existence, and The Fly is one of them. So yes, how do you adapt the Vincent Price film? First of all, you can make it gross. What would it really look like if a man fused with a fly? It wouldn't look pretty, but it would also, you want to make it sad. You want to give it that emotional core. And the emotional core of this is Gina Davis and Jeff Goldblum meet, they kind of hit it off, they have a relationship, and both because he fused with a fly and because he is so enamored with his own scientific pursuit, the relationship cannot work. It is a heartbreaking way. The way this movie ends is heartbreaking. It's not a, it's not even chilling. It's just a downer. And not just because you take a beautiful man like Jeff Goldblum and just turn him into that. I mean, great effects though. It won an Oscar for a reason. It's like last year with The Substance. I was like, if we are not giving this best makeup effects, what are we even doing here? And actually, you could kind of have a comparison between this and The Substance. The main character is so committed to what this is doing to them that they don't quite realize that it's destroying them until it's way too late. But this is one of those movies I hold up as not all remakes are bad. Sometimes they absolutely do up the game and justify its existence. Also, really good score as well. I think the score to this is great. And I gotta appreciate that this movie gets everything done in like 90 minutes and change. If there's one thing you can say about Cronenberg, he can be a really economical filmmaker when he needs to be. I mean, the movie opens up with just Jeff Goldblum going, I'm working on something that's changing the world. Let me tell you about it. There we go. We didn't need 10 minutes opening shots. And now to Crimes of the Future. So, which again shares the title with one of his first films, but neither the concept nor the plot. This is For a while, there was a movie called Existence, which a lot of people saw as that was the kind of the spiritual sequel to Videodrome. And I think when it was just Existence, that worked. And then Crimes of the Future came out, and I'm like, I think this is the spiritual successor to um, Videodrome. So, Videodrome is about this idea of this technology getting inside of our heads and changing both our brains and our bodies. Crimes of the Future takes place in a world where there is this idea of pain just does not exist anymore. So people are making all sorts of modifications to their body. And then there's this other thread where there is a lot of pollution in the air and in the water. And people are evolving to be able to eat inorganic matter, i.e., they're able to eat plastic. The opening scene of this film has a child eating plastic, and the child's mother being so horrified by it, she is driven to violence. So it is this idea of there is the biotech has changed to the point where surgery is something a little more sexual now rather than something that needs to be done to preserve your life. But it is also this idea of the human body is starting to naturally evolve. And there is, we never quite found out who it is, but there is someone, be it a government or be it a corporation, that has a vested interest in the fact that humans are evolving to be able to eat inorganic matter. They want it kept secret because they are afraid of what that could mean. But I feel like that even more than Existence, which is kind of more about like video games and stuff. That's a movie that unfortunately got overshadowed by The Matrix. It came out the same year. But this is one where if you talk about the idea of something really changing us down to our core biology, this is a better sequel to Videodrome. Todd, what would you say?
I think there's a good case to be made there because, especially again, per your point to the larger ramifications elements,
Mhm.
this is kind of going to the idea of again what Videodrome built on the technology is changing us. It's the proverbial way of the future, and the question of is this a good future or is this a future gone awry?
Yeah. And it's a really there's also this whole subplot of Viggo Mortensen. He is growing new organs. So whenever he grows a new organ, it becomes an art installation that people come to watch. But he also has to stay in this like biotech organic med bed to recharge. And for him, he's like, I don't know why I'm growing new organs. I don't know why this is happening to me. Versus you have people who are modifying themselves almost for fun. So, like, Morganson is kind of in the James Woods character where he kind of just realizes that there's something else going on. But it's a really, the ending of the film, again, there's like, it's kind of chilling in a way. This idea of he is also one of these people who's now, he can't eat real food, he can only subsist on inorganic matter. This was a very divisive movie. I felt like there were even some regular film fans who watched it who were like, I don't know, this movie's a bit much for me, but I felt, and a lot of other people felt like this was really the return to form for Cronenberg. We had been waiting for body horror stuff for a while, so we're like, oh, it's back. Thank you. But it's also a more mature look at it. So we don't have the exploding heads or the goopy body of Brundlefly. It's more this idea of what are we doing to ourselves, and how are we modifying ourselves. All right, so we're at the end. That was weird. A lot of Cronenberg's movies are weird, a little uncomfortable, but also intriguing. So where do you want to start if you've never seen a film of his before? So I kind of had a couple of ways you could go. If you are really okay with body horror and really gross stuff, I would start with The Fly. That's his most accessible film, if you want to go the body horror route. If you want something more normal, there's History of Violence and there is The Dead Zone. Those are both really, again, accessible films for you to watch. If you're fine with the really wild stuff, there's Videodrome and Crash, which Hey, we both have both of them here. The fact that I've been upgrading a lot of our stuff to Blu-ray and 4K has been a really good boon for the DPL film collection. And if you're kind of like, I want something weird, but I don't want something super gross, Naked Lunch or Cosmopolis would be really good. Also, if you want something normal, like M Butterfly is a perfectly like normal movie to watch. Maybe Eastern Promises again. There's a couple like the violence and history of violence in Eastern Promises are still pretty visceral, so be prepared for that. But even with a guy with a filmography like Cronenberg, I think there is something for everybody. And with that, yes, this is how I mentioned earlier that James Woods pulls a VHS out of his chest. So this was a dummy of James Wood that was made, and that is David Cronenberg in the 80s demonstrating the stomach chest. It's again, these movies aren't for everybody, but or not all of his films are for everybody, but there might be one in there for you. And with that, does anyone have any questions? Just thoroughly grossed out. But yeah, it's again, we do have a number of his films here. I definitely would say like if you're really more like I want to stay kind of normal, I would say check out The Dead Zone. It's got a great Christopher Walken performance too. Christopher Walken's great in that. Good Martin Sheen performance. Tom Skerritt's in it. Tom Skerritt's is always fun. And um yeah, no, we have History of Violence here, but I'll probably have an updated copy soon because Todd and I are upgrading that 4K. But with that, if no one has any questions, I will bid y'all good night, and hopefully we'll see you guys next month for Nick Cage November, where we will talk at length about Wild at Heart, Pig, and Con Air.
It's gonna be
Alrighty,
a
have a
fun
good
cross
night.
section.
Wait, what?
Gonna be a fun cross section.
That is a good cross. Yeah, and of course, leaving Las Vegas, the man won an Oscar for that. So, all right, we'll see you next month.